Heavy-duty decorative homemade doors for your shed or your garage, your barn, your chicken coop. No matter where you need a good solid door, sometimes it's best to build them yourself. That way you can get exactly what you want. Today we're going to build a couple super sturdy solid doors for our storage shed. My name's Dave Whipple and you're watching Bush Radical. A few years ago, we had to tear down the old chicken coop at the house. The building was just beyond repair, and the way it was built, it really wasn't worth salvaging. So once we tore it down and had a good clean concrete slab to work off of, we built a new shed. But after 2 years, I put an addition on the back and I've repainted it, but I still don't have any doors. So that's what we're going to fix today. We're going to put some really good old-style barn-type doors on this shed. Just heavy planks and steel and bolts. So let's start out by getting our measurements. And our measurements, well, they're a little odd. When I put these door openings in, I assumed I would be building doors, so I didn't take a ton of time to make sure my openings were standard sizes. And they're not.
So my thought is big plank doors, just made out of 2x10s with steel straps across the doors, everything bolted together to make them not only keep from warping, but also to be nice and rigid so they don't rack.
All through this winter, it's been snowy, cold, and dark. Today we've got a little bit of sunshine and it's about 20 degrees, so it's a good time to get out and get this project rolling. Good weather to work in. Now the lumber I'm using for these doors came straight from Lowe's. Nothing fancy, right out of their pile of 2x10s. I will say, I had to pick through almost the entire stack to find the 6 or 8 boards I bought that were actually straight. Even with the best boards I can find, some of the sides are a little wavy and they're going to need to be trimmed up. We'll use an electric planer to clean those up. First thing we're going to do is cut all our planks to length, the height the door needs to be. Now to hold these doors together, we're going to use 1/4 inch thick steel flat stock, about 2.5 inches wide. Now I went to my local steel supplier and they have what's called drop bins. That means when somebody comes in to buy a piece of steel, if they have to cut it out of a 20-foot bar, whatever's left over they put in the drop bins. It's like remnants. And you can usually get this steel for about $1 a pound. All the steel that I bought for this project was remnant steel. It came to about 18 pounds and it cost about $18. Much cheaper than you're going to buy it at Tractor Supply or Farm and Home or any of those places. Now what I want to do is I want to put my steel bands, of course, in the same place on every door so when you look at the building they all line up. Some of the edges are a little rough, so they need to just be planed down a bit so I get a nice tight fit. I'm going to go 3/4 of an inch from the outside of the door. That way it'll give me a little space to trim out the door opening once the door's installed. Then we'll use a Sharpie to mark where the bolt holes need to be drilled. Once I got my bolt holes marked, I'll take a speed square and a pick and make sure I've scratched a nice center line so I don't end up off center with my holes. So now it's time to drill out all of our holes. It's always best to drill in increments. Start with an 1/8 inch bit. Drilling in increments takes so much of the work out, and it's also not going to be constantly overheating one big bit that you're trying to force through. Now here's the idea. Once I have all the holes drilled in my first piece of bar stock, I'll stack that bar stock on top of the other piece of bar stock and drop a pin through the first hole. This is an 8-penny nail, it's what I'm using for a pin. From there, I can use the holes in the top piece of bar and just drill through them into the second piece so all the holes line up perfectly, and then drill them out to their ultimate size, which in this case is about 5/16 of an inch. Now from here, the first bolt is the important one. I make sure that my steel is in the right spot, 3/4 of an inch from the edge. Get that first hole drilled and drop that first bolt in. From there, all I have to make sure is that my planks are tight together when I make the hole, and that the ends are nice and flush. And everything should work out pretty good. What a nice day to be out here, working in the sun. Seems like there hadn't been any sun for a month. Now you can see that these bolts are just long enough, just barely long enough. So here's my thought with that. These boards, these 2x10s, they're going to dry out. You get this door built, put it in the sun, it gets airflow constantly. They're going to shrink. They're going to get gaps eventually, and they're also going to shrink front to back. So I wanted to use a bolt that was just long enough to grab the nut. So when these doors do shrink, and they will, I can tighten them up a bit without the bolt sticking out beyond the nut to where you've got those sharp threads out there that can catch your clothing or cut your hand. Now before I start working in this doorway and accidentally bump this big cornice of snow coming off the roof and put it all down the back of my neck, I figured I'd knock it off the roof and shovel it out of the way. Daisy's helping too. She's good help. One last thing I have to do before I hang the door is cut out the bottom plate of this wall. When I stood the wall, of course, the bottom plate runs the full length of the wall, and I never cut it out of the door opening. So I'm using the absolute worst, rustiest old saw I have, because there's a pretty good chance I'm going to hit the concrete with it. I won't do it any favors. Saw it through and knock that plate out. Trim out the ice and the bumps in the cement. We're ready to go. Now the last board in the door, I'm going to have to trim off the side to make it the correct width. These are 2x10s, so they're actually about 9¼ inches, these particular ones. So I'm going to end up with 37 inches wide, and the door opening is only 36. So I'll put that last board on there, flip the door over, trim off the excess. Once the door is trimmed, I'll put the hinges in place. Now, in hindsight, I probably should have put the hinges on the door first, because it was kind of a pain in the neck to screw these hinges into a door that's just floating around, not attached to anything. But I'll find that out in a few minutes. You want to talk about a heavy-duty door? This is like packing 2 sheets of plywood. This sucker has got some weight to it. Now once the door is hung, it's still not a perfect fit. I can't close it, but I'll fix that here in just a minute. Now it's time to do the double doors. As opposed to one big door in this big opening, I'm going to use two doors. I first put down a shim so I can put the first board in and mark that bevel. Bring the board over and set it on top of the shim to guarantee that I've got plenty of room underneath at the bottom, and just mark the top. Now that bevel runs a little long. It runs up onto the next board. So we'll just have to carry that cut over onto the next board beside it. Then building the rest of these doors is going to be very similar to the first one, other than the fact that it's a smaller door. It's 3 boards as opposed to 4, and that center board is cut down to make it the right size. It's going to be a lot lighter, which is going to be nice. I bet that first door weighed a good solid 75 pounds-ish. I'm going to run a screw in at this bevel because these 2 boards aren't lined up quite right. And there, that'll hold them better. Now, when I put the first door in, I had a heck of a time screwing the hinges into the door because the door is just flopping around in the wind, not attached to anything. So I learned my lesson. On this one, I'll put the hinges on the door and then screw the rest of the hinge into the door frame, not vice versa. Now, when I set the door in place, it looks great. Everything is hunky-dory, other than the fact that it's just a fuzz long. So I changed my shim out to a 1/2-inch shim to see if that would make a difference. Because a 1/2 inch, that's enough room on the bottom, but it was still a fuzz long. So I scribe fit the top, cut off the excess, and I think we're going to be good. Lovely. You know, this winter's been dark, cold, and there's been quite a bit of snow. So projects have been pretty slow around here. A lot of stuff I'd like to get done, but there's no real reason to be out in 15-degree weather. Wind blowing, snow coming down. But today with the sun, man, it's hard not to get out and do something. Time to bang out that next door and call it a day. I got to get all these projects knocked out before the snow goes away, because there's a lot of important things to do this year, like ride motorcycle and go smelt dipping. So, time to get the dumb things taken care of. There we go. Finally, the building is closed in. I can leave all my junk in there and not have to worry about it. Keeps the possums out, because the possums this time of year like to get in the garage, probably in the storage shed also. And it's going to keep all the cat prints off my motorcycle seats. So that's perfect. Now these double doors close just fine, but they are a little tight at the bottom, so I will have to go back and trim up the bottoms of these doors just a little bit so that they close a little easier. First thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to put handles on all the doors. We'll throw a level up there just to make sure our door handles are the same height. Not only does the door need a door handle, it just looks right with a door handle, and without it, doesn't look right at all. Now that the door handles are on, I'm going to put a good heavy deadbolt lock on it. Not so much to lock the doors, but just to be able to close the doors and keep them closed from the outside of the door. Well, I think that looks complete now. You got two handles, you got a lock, it sets the door off, makes the door look like it's supposed to. Gives you the opportunity to open either door with a handle and to close it from the outside and keep it shut. Now it's time to trim these doors in to perfection so they fit the hole perfectly. I built them to the exact size of the hole, knowing I would have to probably trim them up a bit. A couple quick passes with an electric hand planer. You can look at the gap at the edge of the door when you close it and see just the specific areas that need to be taken down. Good to go. Perfect. Now on the bottom of the double doors, there's only one spot, the last foot or so, where it's a little bit tight, where you can shut the door, but you have to put the doors together and force them to close. Couple passes with that hand planer. Beautiful.
And just like that, with a little bit of time, a little bit of very standard, easy to find hardware store planks, a few bucks worth of scrap steel, 10 bucks worth of nuts and bolts, you got yourself about the most solid set of doors you can possibly get for next to nothing. Not only that, but they're custom made to fit the hole that's already in the building, and nothing else at the store was going to do that. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. My name's Dave Whipple, and you've been watching Bush Radical. And be radical, eh? See you soon.